The dusty woman collapsed at the edge of town just as Reverend Marcus Webb's wagon rolled past, her body crumpling like a broken doll onto the sun-scorched earth of Lavetta, Colorado. And he knew immediately that God had placed her in his path for a reason. Marcus pulled hard on the reins, bringing his two horses to a halt. Dust swirled around the wagon wheels as he climbed down, his weathered boots hitting the ground with purpose. The woman lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Her clothes were little more than rags, her dark hair matted with dirt and sweat. This was 1883, and the frontier was unforgiving to those without means or protection. "Miss." Marcus knelt beside her, checking for signs of injury. She was thin, dangerously so, her cheekbones sharp beneath skin darkened by sun and grime. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. Green eyes, clouded with exhaustion and pain, met his for just a moment before closing again. Marcus glanced around. A few townspeople had stopped to watch, but no one approached to help. He understood their hesitation. Lavetta was a small town nestled in the shadow of the Spanish Peaks, and strangers often brought trouble. But Marcus had dedicated his life to traveling from settlement to settlement, bringing the gospel and aid to those who needed it most. He could not simply leave this woman to die in the street. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how little she weighed. She moaned softly but did not wake. Marcus carried her to his wagon and laid her gently in the back among his modest possessions, a bedroll, some provisions, his worn Bible, and the few medical supplies he kept on hand. "I need to find help," he murmured, though she could not hear him. He covered her with a blanket despite the heat, knowing that her body was likely in shock. Marcus climbed back onto the wagon seat and guided the horses toward the center of town. Lavetta was growing, with new buildings sprouting up alongside older adobe structures. The railroad had not yet reached this far, but it was coming, and everyone knew it would change everything when it did. He stopped at the general store first. The proprietor, a portly man named Henderson, stepped outside wiping his hands on his apron. "Reverend Webb, good to see you again. What brings you through this time?" "I found a woman collapsed on the road. She needs food, water, and medical attention. Is there a doctor in town?" Henderson's expression shifted from friendly to cautious. "Doc Miller's office is 2 streets over, but he charges for his services." "You know anything about this woman?" "Only that she is in desperate need." Henderson nodded slowly. "You might want to talk to Zane Xavier. He owns the big ranch about 3 miles north of town. He has been known to help folks in need, and he has resources the rest of us do not." Marcus considered this. He had heard of Zane Xavier during his previous visits to Lavetta. The man had built a successful cattle operation and was respected, if somewhat distant from the community. Some said he kept to himself because of a tragedy in his past, though the details varied depending on who told the story. "Where might I find him?" "Could be at the Silver Spur Saloon. He comes into town Tuesdays to handle business. If not there, you will have to ride out to his ranch." Marcus thanked Henderson and drove the wagon toward the doctor's office first. The woman needed immediate care regardless of who would pay for it. He would sort out the financial details later. Dr. Miller was a gruff man in his 50s with gray hair and spectacles perched on his nose. He examined the woman in the back of Marcus's wagon with professional efficiency. Dehydration, malnutrition, exhaustion. Probably been wandering for days, maybe weeks. She has some cuts and bruises, but nothing that will not heal. The real danger is how weak she has become. Her body is eating itself. Dr. Miller straightened. "I can treat her, but she needs time to recover. A bed, regular meals, somewhere safe to rest." "What are your fees, doctor?" Miller quoted a price that made Marcus wince internally. He had some money, donations from the congregations he served, but it was meant to sustain him through his travels and help others along the way. Still, he could not abandon this woman. "I will pay what I can now and work to cover the rest," Marcus said. The doctor studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Get her inside. I will do what I can." Together they carried the woman into the small clinic. Dr. Miller had one examination room and 2 small beds for patients who needed to stay overnight. He laid her on one of the beds and began his work, starting with getting water into her body in small, careful amounts. Marcus stood by, feeling helpless but not wanting to leave. After 20 minutes, the woman's eyes opened again. This time they were clearer, more focused. "Where am I?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from thirst and disuse. "You are safe," Marcus said gently, moving closer so she could see him without straining. "You are in La Veta, Colorado, in Dr. Miller's clinic. I am Reverend Marcus Webb. I found you collapsed on the road." She tried to sit up, panic flashing across her face. Dr. Miller placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Stay still. You are too weak to move. I need to examine you properly and get more fluids into you." "I have no money," she said, her voice breaking. "I cannot pay." "That is a concern for later," Marcus said. "Right now you need to focus on recovering. What is your name?" She hesitated, as if even this simple question required more energy than she had. Grace Garrison." "Grace," Marcus smiled. "A good name. How did you come to be in such a state?" Her eyes filled with tears that spilled down her dirty cheeks. "I lost everything. My family, my home. I have been walking for so long, trying to find somewhere to go, some place that would have me. But every town turned me away." Dr. Miller continued his examination, checking her pulse, listening to her breathing. "Well, you have found someone who will not turn you away. The Reverend here seems determined to help you." Grace looked at Marcus with something like wonder, as if kindness was a foreign concept she had almost forgotten existed. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." "Because you need help," Marcus said simply. "That is reason enough." Over the next hour, Dr. Miller worked to stabilize Grace. He cleaned her wounds, gave her small amounts of broth to start rebuilding her strength, and provided a tincture for pain. Marcus sat quietly, praying and thinking about what to do next. When the immediate crisis had passed and Grace had fallen into a more natural sleep, Marcus stepped outside with the doctor. "She will need weeks to recover fully," Miller said, lighting a pipe. "Possibly longer. She is lucky you found her when you did. Another day in this heat and she would likely be dead. I need to find somewhere she can stay during her recovery. I am a traveling preacher. I cannot provide the stable environment she needs." Miller puffed thoughtfully. "Henderson mentioned Zane Xavier." "He did. It is worth a try. Xavier is a hard man, but he is fair. Lost his wife and daughter to scarlet fever 3 years back. Has not been the same since, but he still runs the most successful ranch in this part of Colorado. If anyone has the means to help, it is him." Marcus made his decision. "I will speak with him." "Where did Henderson say he might be?" "The Silver Spur, or out at his ranch. The Flying X, they call it." Marcus thanked the doctor and paid what he could toward Grace's care. Then he set out to find Zane Xavier. The Silver Spur Saloon was a typical frontier establishment. Wooden boards weathered by sun and storm, windows that had not been cleaned in recent memory, and the sound of men's voices and piano music drifting into the street. Marcus had no objection to saloons in principle. They served a social function, though he wished they served fewer drinks and caused fewer fights. He pushed through the swinging doors. The interior was dim and smoky, and the conversations dipped slightly as heads turned to see who had entered. A preacher in a saloon was not exactly common, though not unheard of either. Marcus approached the barkeeper, a bald man with forearms like hams. "I am looking for Zane Xavier." The barkeeper jerked his chin toward a corner table. "Over there. But I would tread carefully, Reverend. He does not take kindly to interruptions." Marcus followed the gesture and saw a man sitting alone at a corner table, a glass of whiskey in front of him and a ledger book open. Even seated, it was clear that Zane Xavier was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of physical presence that commanded respect. He had dark hair, slightly longer than was fashionable, and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His clothes were practical but well made, the attire of a man who worked hard but could afford quality. Marcus approached the table and waited until the man looked up. Zane's eyes were a striking blue, sharp and assessing. "Mr. Xavier, I am Reverend Marcus Webb. Might I have a moment of your time?" Zane's expression did not change. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Speak your piece, Reverend." Marcus sat down, meeting Zane's gaze directly. "I found a woman collapsed on the road into town this morning. She is at Dr. Miller's clinic now, recovering from dehydration and malnutrition. Her name is Grace Garrison, and she has nothing. No family, no money, no home. I am a traveling preacher, so I cannot offer her a place to stay while she recovers. I was told you might be someone who could help." Zane took a slow drink of his whiskey. "Why would I do that? Because she will die without help, because you have the means to make a difference, because it is the right thing to do. The frontier is full of people in desperate situations. I cannot help them all." "I am not asking you to help them all. I am asking you to help one woman." Zane closed his ledger with a decisive motion. "You know nothing about me, Reverend. What makes you think I am the kind of man who takes in strangers?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I know you lost your wife and daughter. I know you have built something substantial here. I know the people in this town respect you, even if they keep their distance. A man does not earn that kind of reputation without having some measure of integrity." Something flickered in Zane's eyes, anger perhaps, or pain. "Do not presume to know what kind of man I am based on gossip. Then tell me I am wrong. Tell me you are the kind of man who would let a woman die in the street when you have the power to prevent it." They sat in silence for a long moment, the noise of the saloon continuing around them. Finally, Zane stood, towering over the table. "Show me." Marcus rose as well, relief flooding through him. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. I have not agreed to anything except to look at the situation." They walked to Dr. Miller's clinic, Zane's long strides forcing Marcus to hurry to keep pace. The doctor looked surprised when they entered together. "Zane Xavier, did not expect to see you here today. The Reverend tells a compelling story. I want to see this woman he found." Miller led them to where Grace lay sleeping. In the better light of the clinic, with her face cleaned of some of the dirt, it was possible to see that she was young, probably in her early 20s. Even in her depleted state, there was something delicate about her features, a suggestion of the person she had been before hardship had worn her down. Zane stood at the foot of the bed, studying her with an unreadable expression. "What is her story?" "She said she lost her family and her home," Marcus replied. "She has been wandering, looking for a place that would accept her. Every town has turned her away. Why, I do not know. I have not had the chance to ask for details." Dr. Miller spoke up. "She needs weeks of rest and regular meals to recover. She cannot do that living on the street or moving from town to town." Zane was quiet for so long that Marcus began to worry he would refuse. Then, finally, he spoke. "I have a spare room at the ranch house. She can stay there until she is well enough to decide what she wants to do next, but I am not making any promises beyond that." Marcus felt his chest loosen with relief. "That is more than generous, Mr. Xavier. It is practical. I need help at the ranch anyway. Once she has recovered her strength, she can earn her keep doing light work around the house. Cooking, cleaning, mending. My housekeeper quit 2 months ago and I have been managing on my own poorly. Dr. Miller nodded approval. That sounds like a fair arrangement. She will need a few more days here before she is strong enough to move, though. Fine. Send word when she is ready, and I will come with a wagon to transport her. Zane looked at Marcus. You will want to explain the arrangement to her when she wakes. Make sure she understands this is temporary and conditional on her being willing to work. I will. Thank you, Mr. Xavier. Zane left without another word, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Dr. Miller watched him go, then turned to Marcus with raised eyebrows. Well, that went better than I expected. Zane has not shown much interest in anything since his family died. Maybe this will be good for both of them. Marcus hoped so. He spent the rest of the day in La Veta, making himself useful where he could, visiting the sick and speaking with those who wanted spiritual guidance. But his thoughts kept returning to Grace and wondering what circumstances had brought her to such desperate straits. That evening, Grace woke again. She was stronger this time, able to sit up with help and take more substantial food. Marcus pulled a chair close to her bed. How are you feeling? Better. Still weak, but better. She looked around the clinic. I remember you finding me. Everything else is hazy. You have been very ill, but Dr. Miller says you will recover with time and care. Grace's expression became guarded. I told you before, I have no way to pay. I have found someone who can help. His name is Zane Xavier. He owns a ranch north of town. He has agreed to let you stay at his ranch house while you recover, and once you are strong enough, you can help with household work in exchange for room and board. Grace stared at him. A stranger is willing to do this. Why? I convinced him it was the right thing to do. He lost his own family not long ago. Perhaps he understands loss. Tears filled Grace's eyes again. I do not know what to say. I had given up hope that anyone would help me. Marcus took her hand gently. Grace, you are not alone anymore, but I need to know more about your situation. What happened to bring you here? She was quiet for a long time, struggling with whether to speak. Finally, the words came, halting and painful. My father owned a small farm in Kansas, just him and me after my mother died when I was young. Last year, he borrowed money from a man in town to keep the farm going through a bad season. When he could not pay it back, the man said I could work off the debt as a servant in his household. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest. That is unconscionable. My father refused. There was a confrontation. The man shot my father, killed him right there in our doorway. Then he tried to take me by force, said I belonged to him now because of the debt. I managed to get away, but I had nothing, no home, no family, nowhere to go. I have been walking ever since, trying to find honest work, but every town either had nothing to offer or men who saw me as something to be used. The raw pain in her voice made Marcus's heart ache. Grace, what happened to you was evil and wrong. You are not responsible for your father's debt. You do not belong to anyone. That is what I told myself to keep walking, but after a while it started to feel like maybe I was not meant to survive, like maybe there was no place for me in this world. There is a place for you, and you have survived for a reason. I truly believe God led me to you today. Grace managed a weak smile. I have not had much cause to believe in God lately, Reverend, but if he sent you, then maybe I was wrong to give up on him. Over the next 3 days, Grace slowly regained her strength. Dr. Miller was pleased with her progress, and Marcus visited daily to check on her and provide company. She was quiet by nature, but as she felt safer, she began to speak more freely about her life before tragedy struck. She had loved learning to read and write, unusual for a farm girl, but her father had valued education. She enjoyed cooking and had a talent for making even simple ingredients taste good. She had dreamed of perhaps teaching someday, though that dream had seemed impossible even before everything fell apart. Marcus found himself genuinely liking Grace. She had a gentle spirit, but also a core of strength that had kept her alive through unimaginable hardship. He prayed that Zane Xavier's ranch would provide the safe haven she needed to heal, not just physically but emotionally as well. On the fourth day, Dr. Miller declared Grace well enough to move, though she still needed rest and good food. Marcus sent word to Zane, who arrived that afternoon with a wagon lined with blankets to make the journey more comfortable. Zane entered the clinic, and Grace saw him for the first time. She had been sitting in a chair, wearing a simple dress that one of the town women had donated. It was too big for her thin frame, but it was clean and whole. She stood when Zane entered, swaying slightly with the effort. "You must be Mr. Xavier. I am Grace Garrison. I want to thank you for your kindness." Zane nodded, his expression neutral. "Can you walk to the wagon, or do you need help?" "I can walk." She made it 3 steps before her legs buckled. Zane moved quickly, catching her before she fell. For a moment they were frozen, his arms around her, her hands gripping his shirt to steady herself. Grace looked up at him, and their eyes met. Something passed between them in that instant, a recognition that neither could name. Zane felt it like a shock through his system, awareness of the woman in his arms not as a charity case but as a person, vital and real. Grace felt it too, a sudden consciousness of strength and warmth, of safety in a way she had not felt in so long. Zane recovered first, carefully setting her back on her feet but keeping one hand under her elbow. "Perhaps I should carry you after all." "I can manage," Grace said, though her voice was unsteady. "Your pride will not help if you fall and injure yourself." He did not wait for permission, simply scooped her up and carried her to the wagon. Grace was too surprised and too weak to protest. He settled her gently among the blankets, then turned to Marcus. "Thank you for your help, Reverend. If you are still in the area, you are welcome to visit and see how she is settling in. I will be conducting services here on Sunday. Perhaps I will ride out after that." Zane climbed onto the wagon seat and took up the reins. Grace looked back at Marcus, her expression a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. He raised a hand in farewell, praying silently that he had done the right thing. The journey to the Flying X Ranch took about 40 minutes. Zane drove carefully, avoiding the worst of the ruts in the road. Grace sat in the back, watching the landscape pass. The Spanish peaks dominated the western horizon, their distinctive shapes comforting in their permanence. The land here was beautiful in a stark way, grassland dotted with piñon and juniper, cut through with arroyos and rocky outcroppings. Finally, they crested a rise, and Grace saw the ranch spread out before them. The main house was a solid structure built of wood and stone, larger than she had expected. There were several outbuildings, a barn, corrals with horses, and in the distance she could see cattle grazing. "This is your home?" she asked, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "This is the Flying X," Zane replied. "I built it over the last 8 years." He pulled the wagon up to the main house and came around to help Grace down. She was steadier this time, though she still needed his support to walk to the door. Inside, the house was neat but clearly lacking a woman's touch. The furniture was functional, the floors swept but not scrubbed, and there were no curtains on the windows. Zane led her to a bedroom off the main living area. It was simple but clean, with a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A window looked out over the front yard. "This will be your room. There is water in the pitcher, and I will bring you something to eat shortly. Rest as much as you need." When you are feeling stronger, we can discuss what work you feel capable of doing." Grace sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. "Mr. Xavier, I do not know how to properly thank you. No need for thanks. This is a practical arrangement." His tone was businesslike, almost cold. "I need help around the house, and you need a place to stay. Once you have recovered your strength and decided what you want to do with your future, you can move on." He left before she could respond, closing the door quietly behind him. Grace lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The mattress was more comfortable than anything she had slept on in months. Despite Zane's brusque manner, she felt safe for the first time since her father had died. Outside, Zane leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. He had not expected to feel anything when he looked at Grace. He had thought himself dead inside, frozen by grief and guilt. But when he had caught her, when he had looked into those green eyes, something had shifted. It terrified him. He had loved his wife, Ellen, deeply. And his daughter, Rose, had been the light of his life. When scarlet fever had taken them both within days of each other, Zane had wanted to die too. Only the ranch, the constant demands of work and survival, had kept him going. He had vowed never to let anyone close enough to hurt him that way again. But now there was Grace in his house, in the room that had once been meant for guests, but had stood empty for years. And despite his best efforts to see her as merely someone he was helping, he could not deny the pull he felt toward her. He pushed away from the wall. He had work to do, cattle to check, fences to mend. He would keep his distance, maintain the boundaries. She would recover, work for a while to repay his kindness, and then move on. That was how it had to be inside the house. Grace eventually rose and washed her face and hands. She found a comb on the dresser and worked through her tangled hair, wincing at the knots. When she finally felt somewhat presentable, she ventured out into the main room. The house was quiet. Through the window, she could see Zane in the distance, working with one of the horses in the corral. She found the kitchen and looked around. It was well stocked with basics, but everything had the feel of a space used by someone who cooked out of necessity rather than pleasure. Grace felt a sudden urge to do something useful, to justify her presence here. She found flour, lard, and some dried apples. Her strength was limited, but she could manage something simple. She started making biscuits and a basic apple compote, working slowly and resting when she needed to. By the time Zane came back to the house an hour later, the smell of fresh baking filled the air. He stopped in the doorway, surprised. Grace turned from the stove, wiping her hands on a cloth. "I hope you do not mind." "I wanted to help, and I was not strong enough for anything more strenuous than this." Zane looked at the biscuits cooling on the counter, at the pot of apple compote simmering gently. Something in his chest tightened. Ellen used to bake, filling the house with warmth and good smells. "You should be resting," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I rested, and this is not hard work. Please sit. Let me serve you." Zane wanted to refuse, to maintain distance, but the smell of the food and the earnest look on Grace's face made it impossible. He sat at the table, feeling awkward in his own home. Grace brought him a plate with warm biscuits and compote, then poured coffee. She sat across from him with her own small portion, eating slowly. The biscuits were excellent, light and flaky. The compote was perfectly sweetened. Zane ate in silence, unsure what to say. Finally, Grace spoke. "Reverend Webb told me you lost your family. I am sorry. I know what it is like to lose the people you love most." Zane set down his coffee cup carefully. "I would prefer not to discuss it. Of course, forgive me." They finished the meal in uncomfortable silence. Afterward, Zane stood abruptly. "I have more work to do. Make yourself at home. If you need anything, there are supplies in the pantry." He left quickly, almost fleeing. Grace watched him go, understanding that she had touched a wound still too raw to bear examination. She cleaned up the kitchen, moving slowly to conserve her energy, then retreated to her room. Over the next week, a pattern developed. Grace would wake and prepare breakfast, simple things that did not overtax her strength. Zane would eat quickly and head out to work. Grace would spend the day resting, doing light housework and preparing meals. Zane would return in the evening, eat the dinner she made, exchange only the most necessary words, and then retreat to his own room or to paperwork. It was cordial but distant. Grace understood that Zane was keeping walls between them, but she could not help wanting to bridge that gap. He had saved her life by taking her in. She wanted to know the man behind the gruff exterior. She began to learn his routines and preferences. He liked his coffee strong and black. He preferred simple, hearty food. He worked from dawn until well after dark, pushing himself relentlessly. She noticed that he never spoke of his late wife and daughter, that there were no photographs displayed in the house, no personal mementos visible. It was as if he was trying to erase the past, to bury his grief under endless work. Grace gradually grew stronger. By the end of the second week, she felt almost like herself again, though still thinner than she had been. She began to take on more work, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, mending the tears in Zane's work shirts. She also began to venture outside, exploring the immediate area around the house. The ranch was beautiful, and she found peace in the wide open spaces. One afternoon, she walked to the corral where Zane was working with a young horse, teaching it to accept a saddle. He saw her approaching and paused. "Should you be out in the sun? I am much better now." I wanted to see the ranch properly. She leaned on the fence, watching him work. He had a calm, patient way with the horse, speaking to it in a low voice and moving slowly so as not to spook it. Grace found herself captivated by the gentleness in his strong hands, the quiet confidence in his movements. "You are good with horses," she said. "I have been working with them most of my life." He secured the saddle, and the horse shifted but did not bolt. "This one is green but has potential." "What is his name?" "I do not name them. They are working animals." Grace smiled slightly. "Even working animals deserve names. He looks like a Dusty to me." Zane glanced at her, something that might have been amusement flickering in his eyes. "Dusty? Look at his coat. That pale brown color like dust at sunset. You have a fanciful way of seeing things." "Is that bad?" "No, just different from how I see the world." He returned to working with the horse, and Grace continued to watch. After a while, she asked, "Is there anything I could do to help?" "I am stronger now. I want to earn my keep properly." Zane considered. "Can you handle chickens?" "I grew up on a farm. I can handle chickens. I have a coop behind the barn, but I have been neglecting it. The hens are not laying as well as they should. Could use someone to tend them properly, collect eggs, keep the coop clean." "I can do that," he nodded. "I will show you after I finish here." It was the longest conversation they had had since she arrived. Grace felt a small glow of satisfaction. She was beginning to find her place here, to feel useful rather than merely tolerated. True to his word, Zane showed her the chicken coop after he finished with the horse. It was in need of attention, the bedding old and the water dirty. Grace set to work immediately, and Zane found himself watching her, noting the efficient way she moved, the soft sounds she made to calm the birds. "You were not exaggerating about growing up on a farm," he said. "My father taught me to work hard and take pride in doing things well. Even small things like caring for chickens." "He sounds like he was a good man." Grace's expression softened with sadness. "He was. He did his best for me after my mother died. He deserved better than how his life ended." Zane felt an unexpected surge of anger on her behalf, anger at the man who had killed her father and tried to claim her. The man who killed him, was there any justice? I do not know. I ran and never looked back. For all I know, he is still there, living free while my father is in the ground. That is not right. No, it is not. But what could I have done? Who would have believed me or helped me? I had no proof, no resources, no standing in the community. I did what I had to do to survive. Zane understood that kind of pragmatism, the harsh calculations required to survive on the frontier. But he also felt a growing respect for Grace's resilience. Over the following weeks, something began to shift between them. The conversations grew longer, less guarded. Grace learned that Zane had come west from Missouri, seeking opportunity and adventure. He had built the Flying X from nothing, working first as a ranch hand, then saving enough to buy land and cattle of his own. He had met Ellen in Denver, where she had been working as a teacher. They had married and built a life together. Rose had been born 2 years later, a healthy, happy child. For 5 years, Zane had known something close to perfect happiness. Then the fever came. Ellen had fallen ill first, and despite Dr. Miller's best efforts, she had died within 3 days. Rose had contracted it from her mother and followed 2 days later. Zane had buried them both on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree. He told Grace this haltingly, late one evening when they had both lingered at the dinner table longer than usual. Grace listened with tears in her eyes, understanding the depth of his loss because she carried her own. "I am so sorry," she said when he finished. "No one should have to endure that. Life on the frontier is hard. Death is common. I should have been prepared for it." "You cannot prepare for losing the people you love most. That kind of pain does not care about preparation." Zane looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the broken woman he had taken in out of obligation, but someone who understood him in a way few people could. "You have lost as much as I have. How do you keep going? Because the alternative is giving up, and I am not ready to do that. My father would want me to live, to find happiness again if I can. Your wife and daughter would want the same for you. I am not sure I am capable of happiness anymore. Maybe not today, but someday." The conversation stayed with Zane long after he had gone to bed. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Grace and the way she made him feel. It was not just attraction, though he could not deny that he found her beautiful, especially now that she had regained her health. It was something deeper, a connection that scared him because it reminded him he was still capable of feeling. For Grace, the conversation had been cathartic. She felt closer to Zane, as if they had crossed some invisible threshold. She understood now why he kept his distance, why he worked so hard. He was running from his pain the same way she had been running when Reverend Webb found her. But maybe, she thought as she drifted to sleep, they did not have to run anymore. Maybe they could find healing together. The next morning, Zane came to breakfast and found Grace humming as she cooked. It was a sound the house had not heard in years. He stood in the doorway listening, feeling something warm unfurl in his chest. "Good morning," Grace said, turning with a smile. "I hope you are hungry. I made plenty." "Morning," Zane replied, taking his seat. "You seem cheerful today." "I feel good, strong, happy." She set a plate in front of him, eggs and bacon and fried potatoes. "Is that all right?" "More than all right." They ate together, and this time the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. After breakfast, Zane surprised himself by asking, "Would you like to see more of the ranch?" "I need to check on the cattle in the north pasture. It is a pleasant ride if you feel up to it." Grace's face lit up. "I would love that, but I should warn you, I have not ridden in years. I have a gentle mare that will suit you." An hour later they were riding across the grassland, the morning sun warm on their faces. Grace rode the mare Zane had chosen, a calm bay with a smooth gait. Zane rode beside her on his own horse, a tall chestnut gelding. Grace had forgotten the joy of riding, the sense of freedom it brought. She laughed as the mare broke into a gentle lope, and the sound made Zane smile despite himself. They reached the north pasture and spent time checking the cattle, Zane explaining his operation and his plans for expansion. Grace listened attentively, asking intelligent questions. It occurred to Zane that he had not talked this much about the ranch in years, and that it felt good to share it with someone who genuinely cared. On the ride back, they stopped by a creek to let the horses drink. Grace dismounted and sat on a rock, trailing her fingers in the cool water. "It is beautiful here," she said. "I can see why you love it." Zane sat beside her, closer than he intended. "It was supposed to be a legacy for Rose. I wanted to build something she could be proud of, something that would last beyond my lifetime. It still can be a legacy. Not the one you planned, but a legacy nonetheless." "For who? I have no heirs now." Grace looked at him, her green eyes serious. "Maybe you will someday. Life is long, Zane. There is time for new dreams." He met her gaze, and the air between them seemed to thicken. Zane realized how close they were sitting, how easy it would be to reach out and touch her face. He saw the same awareness in Grace's eyes, saw the way her breath quickened. He pulled back, standing abruptly. "We should head back. I have work to finish." Grace felt the moment shatter, but she did not protest. She mounted the mare, and they rode back to the ranch house in silence. But something had changed. A line had been crossed, and both of them knew there was no going back to the careful distance they had maintained. That evening, Reverend Webb arrived to check on Grace as he had promised. He was delighted to see her looking so well, her cheeks no longer hollow, her eyes bright and clear. "Grace, you look wonderful. The ranch life agrees with you." "It does," she admitted. "I feel more myself than I have in a long time." Over dinner, Marcus observed the dynamic between Grace and Zane. He saw the way Zane's eyes tracked Grace's movements, the way Grace's smile was softer when she looked at Zane. He recognized the signs of a connection forming, and he prayed it would be a blessing for both of them. After the meal, Marcus spoke with Zane privately. "You have done a good thing here, Zane. Grace was dying when I found her. You saved her life. She has been helpful around the ranch." "It is a fair exchange." Marcus smiled knowingly. "Is that all it is?" Zane's jaw tightened. "What are you suggesting, Reverend?" "Only that I see two people who have suffered great loss finding comfort in each other's company. There is no shame in that. I am not looking for comfort. I am not looking for anything beyond help running this ranch. Sometimes what we need finds us whether we are looking for it or not. Do not be so afraid of feeling again that you push away something good." Marcus left the next morning, but his words stayed with Zane. He tried to maintain his emotional distance, but it became increasingly difficult. Grace was woven into the fabric of his daily life now. She was there at every meal, her presence making the house feel like a home again. She hummed while she worked, and she laughed at small things, and she had a way of looking at him that made him feel seen in a way he had not been since Ellen died. One afternoon, Zane came back to the house to find Grace standing in the middle of the living room, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He immediately went to her, alarmed. "Grace, what is wrong? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. She pointed to a corner of the room where a small wooden box sat on a shelf. Zane realized with a jolt what had happened. She had been dusting and had opened the box. Inside were the only photographs he had of Ellen and Rose, the ones he had hidden away because he could not bear to look at them. "I am sorry," Grace finally managed. "I did not mean to pry. I was just cleaning and I did not realize." Zane's first instinct was anger at the invasion of his privacy, but when he looked at Grace's stricken face, the anger dissolved. He walked to the box and looked down at the photographs. Ellen's lovely face smiled up at him. Rose, only 4 years old in the picture, gap-toothed and joyful. They were beautiful, Grace said softly. Your wife and daughter, they were beautiful and you must miss them terribly. Zane's throat tightened. Every day, Grace moved to stand beside him. I am not trying to replace them. I want you to know that. I know I can never be what they were to you. Zane turned to look at her, seeing the vulnerability in her expression. Grace, I need to be honest with you about something. I have been trying to keep my distance, to see you only as someone I am helping, but that has become impossible. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean that you have become more to me than I intended. I find myself thinking about you when I should be working. I look forward to coming back to the house because you are here. And that terrifies me because I swore I would never let myself care about anyone again. Grace's heart raced. I feel the same way. I did not expect to feel anything for anyone after everything I have been through. But you make me feel safe. You make me feel like maybe I can have a future after all. They stood facing each other, the photographs of Zane's lost family between them. Zane reached out slowly, giving Grace time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not, he cupped her face gently with his hand. I do not know how to do this, he said. I do not know how to let someone in again. Neither do I. But maybe we can figure it out together. Zane leaned down, and Grace rose on her toes, and their lips met in a kiss that was tentative and sweet and full of the promise of healing. When they finally pulled apart, both were trembling. I need to take this slowly, Zane said. I am not ready to rush into anything. Slow is good. I am not going anywhere. From that moment, their relationship shifted into something new. They continued with their daily routines, but now there was an undercurrent of awareness, of possibility. Zane began to open up more, talking about his past, his dreams, his fears. Grace shared her own stories, the happy memories of her childhood before tragedy struck. They began to spend their evenings together, sitting on the porch and watching the sun set behind the Spanish peaks. Sometimes they talked, and sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence. Zane found himself laughing again, something he had not thought possible. Grace bloomed under Zane's attention. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be cherished. Zane was careful with her, respectful of her boundaries, but his feelings were clear in the way he looked at her, the small touches that grew more frequent as the weeks passed. One evening, about 2 months after Grace had come to the ranch, Zane took her hand as they sat on the porch. I want to show you something. Will you come with me? Of course. He led her to the barn and saddled 2 horses. They rode out into the gathering dusk, following a path Grace had not traveled before. After about 20 minutes, they came to a small hillside shaded by a cottonwood tree. Grace saw 2 simple wooden crosses and understood immediately where they were. This is Ellen and Rose, Zane said quietly, dismounting. Grace followed suit, standing respectfully back. Zane approached the graves and stood silently for a long moment. Then he began to speak, and Grace realized he was talking to them. Ellen, I want you to know I have not forgotten you. I will never forget you or Rose. You were my heart, both of you, but I have been so lost without you, so broken. And then Grace came into my life, and she has helped me find my way back to living. I think you would like her. I think you would want me to be happy again. Tears streamed down Grace's face as she listened. Zane turned to her, his own eyes wet. I needed them to know. I needed to say goodbye to the guilt I have been carrying, the feeling that moving forward would mean betraying their memory. Grace went to him, wrapping her arms around him. They will always be part of you. That does not change because you are ready to live again. They held each other as the last light faded from the sky, 2 people who had been shattered by loss finding strength in each other. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. but it was a peaceful quiet. When they arrived, Zane helped Grace down from her horse, his hands lingering on her waist. In the soft glow of the lamplight from the house, he kissed her again, deeper this time with more certainty. "Grace, I am falling in love with you. I fought it, but I cannot anymore. You have brought light back into my life." Grace felt joy flooding through her. "I love you too, Zane." "I have for a while now, but I was afraid to say it." "Do not be afraid. Not with me." From that night forward, they were truly together. The remaining weeks of autumn passed in a golden haze. Zane taught Grace more about running the ranch, and she proved to be a quick learner. She had a natural way with the animals and a good head for the business side of things. The ranch hands who worked for Zane noticed the change in their boss. He smiled more, laughed more, and seemed lighter somehow. They were happy for him, having witnessed his grief and isolation over the past years. As winter approached, Zane and Grace spent their evenings planning for the future. Zane wanted to expand the ranch, buy more land, increase the herd. Grace suggested starting a larger vegetable garden in the spring and perhaps getting more chickens. They talked about everything and nothing, building dreams together. One snowy evening in December, Zane sat Grace down at the table and took both her hands in his. "Grace, I have something to ask you. I know we have not been together long in some ways, but in other ways it feels like I have known you forever. You have become essential to me, to my life here. I cannot imagine this ranch, this future, without you in it." He pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "This was my grandmother's ring. It is all I have left of my family from before I came west. I would be honored if you would wear it. Grace Garrison, will you marry me?" Grace's eyes filled with happy tears. "Yes. Yes, Zane, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. They kissed, sealing the promise between them. "I want to do this properly," Zane said. "I want to marry you in a church with witnesses. I want everyone to know that you are my wife, that you belong here, and that this is your home as much as it is mine." "I would like that. Could we ask Reverend Webb to perform the ceremony?" "I was hoping you would say that. He brought you to me. It seems right that he should be the one to marry us." They sent word to Reverend Webb, who was delighted by the news and readily agreed to come to La Veta to perform the ceremony. The date was set for a Saturday in early January, giving them time to prepare. Grace had never imagined she would have a real wedding. She had no family to invite, no friends from her past. But the women of La Veta, hearing of the upcoming marriage, rallied around her. They helped her make a simple but beautiful dress from fabric Zane bought. They offered advice and shared their own wedding stories. Zane found himself looking forward to the wedding with an emotion he had not expected: hope. He was starting over, building a new life, and this time he would not take a single moment for granted. The wedding day arrived clear and cold. The small church in La Veta was full of townspeople who had come to witness the union. Zane stood at the front, nervous in a way he had not been even at his first wedding. This felt momentous, like he was stepping fully back into life after years of merely existing. When Grace appeared at the back of the church, Zane's breath caught. The dress was simple, but she looked radiant. Her dark hair was styled softly, and her green eyes shone with happiness. She walked down the aisle toward him, and he could not look away. Reverend Webb performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity, speaking about love and second chances, about how God could bring beauty from ashes. When it came time for vows, Zane and Grace spoke from the heart. "Grace, I promise to cherish you, to honor you, and to build a life with you that is worthy of the gift you have given me. You saved me as surely as I saved you, and I will spend the rest of my days showing you how grateful I am that you came into my life. Zane, I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to love you with everything I have, and to make our home a place of joy and peace. You gave me hope when I had none, and you gave me a future when I thought I had lost everything. I will love you for the rest of my life." Reverend Webb pronounced them husband and wife, and Zane kissed Grace to the applause of the gathered community. They left the church as Mr. and Mrs. Xavier, stepping into their new life together. The townspeople hosted a small celebration at the hotel, with food and music and dancing. Grace had never been to a party in her honor before, and she was overwhelmed by the kindness shown to her. Women who had been strangers weeks ago hugged her and welcomed her into their community. Men clapped Zane on the back and congratulated him. Late in the evening, Zane and Grace slipped away from the celebration and drove back to the ranch under a sky brilliant with stars. The house was warm and welcoming, the fire Zane had banked before they left still glowing in the hearth. This was their wedding night, and both were nervous. Grace had no experience with physical intimacy, and Zane had not been with anyone since Ellen. But they loved each other, and that love guided them. They came together slowly, gently, learning each other with tenderness and care. It was not perfect, but it was beautiful, a full joining of two hearts that had been broken and were now healing together. In the quiet aftermath, they lay tangled together, Grace's head on Zane's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Are you happy?" Zane asked, stroking her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible. Are you?" "Yes, I feel like I can breathe again, like the weight I have been carrying has finally lifted." They fell asleep in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. The winter passed peacefully. Grace settled fully into her role as Zane's wife and partner in running the ranch. She proved to have a talent for managing the household finances, finding ways to save money and increase efficiency. Zane valued her input and began to consult her on major decisions about the ranch. They worked together during the day and came together each night, building intimacy both physical and emotional. Grace learned the contours of Zane's body, the places that made him sigh, the touches that brought him pleasure. Zane learned Grace's preferences, her rhythms, her needs. Their lovemaking became a language of its own, a way of expressing feelings that words could not capture. In early spring, Grace began to feel unwell in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she had eaten, but when the nausea persisted for over a week, she began to suspect the truth. She waited a bit longer to be sure before telling Zane. One evening after dinner, she took his hand and placed it on her belly. "Zane, I think we are going to have a baby." Zane's eyes widened. A cascade of emotions crossed his face: joy, fear, hope, anxiety. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." Zane pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "A baby. I never thought I would have another child. Are you happy about it?" "Yes. Scared but happy. What about you?" "The same. I am terrified something will go wrong, but I am also so excited. I want to have your child, Zane. I want to build a family with you." They went to see Dr. Miller the following week, and he confirmed Grace's suspicions. She was about 2 months along, which meant the baby would arrive in late autumn. Zane became intensely protective of Grace, worrying about her health and trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. Grace found it both endearing and frustrating. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she told him after he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have babies every day while doing far more strenuous work than this." "I know, but I cannot help worrying. I lost Ellen and rose to illness. I could not bear to lose you or this baby." Grace softened, understanding the source of his fear. "I am healthy and Dr. Miller says everything looks good. You have to trust that this will be all right. I am trying." As Grace's belly grew, so did their anticipation. They spent evenings discussing names and preparing one of the spare rooms as a nursery. Grace sewed baby clothes, and Zane built a cradle with his own hands, working on it in the barn during quiet moments. The ranch hands were happy to hear about the coming baby, and they went out of their way to help Grace with tasks that had become difficult as her pregnancy progressed. The women of La Veta visited often, bringing gifts and advice. Reverend Webb stopped by in late summer, delighted to see Grace's obvious pregnancy. "God is good," he said. "Look at how far you have come from the broken woman I found on the road." "I would not have survived without your help," Grace said. "You saved my life that day, Reverend." "I was just the instrument. God had a plan for you, and that plan included Zane and this child and the life you are building here." In October, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, Grace went into labor. It was long and difficult, and Zane paced outside the bedroom where Dr. Miller and 2 women from town attended Grace. He prayed more fervently than he had since Ellen and Rose had died, begging God to spare Grace and the baby. After nearly 12 hours, he heard the cry of a newborn. His heart stopped, waiting for someone to tell him if Grace was all right. Finally, one of the women opened the door, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Xavier, and your wife is tired but well." Zane rushed into the room. Grace lay propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle. She looked up at him with tired eyes full of joy. "We have a son," she whispered. Zane sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the baby's tiny face. He had dark hair and seemed alert, his small eyes trying to focus. Zane felt a rush of love so intense it almost hurt. "He is perfect," Zane said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you, Grace. Thank you for this gift." Grace placed the baby in Zane's arms, and he held his son for the first time, marveling at how small and fragile he was. "Have you thought about a name?" she asked. "I have been thinking about it a lot. What would you say to Marcus Webb, Xavier? Marcus after the Reverend who brought you to me, and Webb as a middle name in his honor." Grace's eyes filled with happy tears. "I think that is perfect. Reverend Webb will be so honored. He saved both of us in different ways. It seems right." Little Marcus became the center of their world. Zane was a devoted father, helping with nighttime feedings and diaper changes, marveling at every small development. Grace had never seen him so happy, so engaged with life. As winter settled in again, the Xavier household was full of warmth and life. The fireplace crackled, the baby cooed in his cradle, and Zane and Grace sat together in the evenings, planning for the future. "I want to expand the house," Zane said one night. "Add more bedrooms. I want Marcus to grow up with brothers and sisters." Grace smiled. "You want more children, if you do. I want this house to be full of life and laughter. I want to build something that lasts, a true legacy." "I would like that. I want Marcus to have the family I lost, the kind of home where he feels loved and safe always." They continued to build their life together over the following years. Grace became pregnant again when Marcus was 18 months old, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Ellen Rose, honoring Zane's first wife and daughter. Grace had suggested it, feeling no jealousy or competition with the memory of the women Zane had loved before. They were part of his story, part of what had made him the man she loved. Zane was deeply moved by Grace's generosity of spirit. Their daughter became another source of joy in the household, a happy baby with Zane's blue eyes and Grace's smile. The ranch continued to prosper. Zane expanded the cattle operation and bought additional land. Grace managed the household and helped with the business side of things, proving to have a sharp mind for numbers and negotiations. They became a true partnership in every sense. When Reverend Webb visited, which he did several times a year, He was always delighted to see how the family had grown and flourished. He baptized both children and watched with satisfaction as the home he had helped create filled with love. Marcus grew into a strong, curious boy who loved the ranch and the animals. Ellen Rose was sweet and imaginative, always creating games and stories. Grace became pregnant a third time, and when she went into labor, it was faster and easier than the previous times. She gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and Thomas, much to everyone's surprise and delight. The Xavier household was indeed full of life and laughter. The house that had been so silent and sad when Grace first arrived now rang with children's voices. Zane thrived in the chaos, playing with his children, teaching them about the ranch, being the kind of father he had dreamed of being. Grace watched her family grow with a sense of profound gratitude. She thought often of the desperate woman she had been, walking alone and hopeless toward an uncertain future. She thought of Reverend Webb finding her and of Zane offering her a home when he had every reason to remain closed off and isolated. Their love had healed them both, giving them the strength to build something beautiful from the ruins of their pasts. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Marcus became old enough to help with ranch work, learning from his father. Ellen Rose showed an interest in books and learning, and Grace taught her to read and write. The twins were wild and mischievous, keeping everyone on their toes. Zane and Grace's love deepened with time. They knew each other's thoughts, could communicate with a glance. Their physical relationship remained passionate, and they still found moments to steal away from the demands of children and ranch, reconnecting in the privacy of their bedroom. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zane surprised Grace by taking her on a trip to Denver, leaving the children in the care of trusted ranch hands and townspeople. It was the first time they had been alone together for more than a few hours since Marcus was born. In Denver, they stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked the city streets hand in hand like young lovers. Grace had never been to a city before, and she was fascinated by everything she saw. On their last night, as they lay together in the hotel bed, Zane pulled Grace close. "Have I told you lately that you are the best thing that ever happened to me?" Grace smiled against his chest. "You have, but I never get tired of hearing it. When I think about where I was when you came into my life, how empty and broken I was, it amazes me that we found each other. I was broken too. We healed each other. We did, and we built something incredible. 4 beautiful children, a successful ranch, a real partnership. I could not ask for more." Grace propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "Are you happy, Zane? Truly happy?" "Happier than I ever imagined I could be. What about you?" "I am exactly where I am meant to be. With you, with our children on the ranch. I love my life." They made love slowly, savoring each other, reaffirming the bond that had grown so strong over the years. When they returned to the ranch, they were refreshed and even more committed to each other. As their children grew older, Grace and Zane faced new challenges. Marcus, at 16, was headstrong and eager to prove himself. Ellen Rose, at 14, was becoming a young woman with dreams of perhaps becoming a teacher like Zane's first wife had been. The twins, now 12, were inseparable and constantly finding trouble. But through it all, Zane and Grace faced everything together. They made decisions as partners, supported each other through difficulties, and celebrated successes as a team. Reverend Webb, now quite elderly, made one last visit to the ranch when Marcus was 18. He was frail but still sharp-minded, and he looked around the bustling household with deep satisfaction. "You know," he said to Grace and Zane as they sat on the porch while the children played in the yard, "when I found you that day, Grace, collapsed in the road, I had no idea what God had planned. I just knew I had to help. But look at what has come from that simple act of compassion. A thriving family, a successful ranch, children being raised with love and values. It is more than I could have hoped for. Grace took his weathered hand. You saved my life, Reverend. Everything I have, everything I am now started with your kindness. And your courage, Marcus Webb said. Do not discount that. You had the courage to accept help, to trust again, to love again. That took strength. Zane added, you brought grace to me, and in doing so, you saved my life too. I was lost to grief, and she brought me back. The old Reverend smiled. Then my work here is complete. I can leave this world knowing I helped create something beautiful. He passed away peacefully in his sleep that night in the guest room at the ranch. Grace and Zane mourned him deeply, and they buried him in the Lavetta cemetery with a headstone that read, Reverend Marcus Webb, a man who brought hope to the hopeless. Young Marcus, his namesake, stood at the grave and vowed to live up to the legacy of the man who had saved his parents. It was a vow he would keep, eventually becoming a community leader known for his compassion and generosity. As the years continued to pass, Grace and Zane grew older but remained devoted to each other. Their children married and started families of their own, some staying near the ranch, others venturing to new places. But they all returned often, drawn by the love and stability their parents had created. Grace's hair turned silver, and lines etched themselves around Zane's eyes and mouth. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been when they first fell in love. The spark between them never dimmed. On a warm summer evening, when Grace was in her late 50s and Zane in his early 60s, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. Their grandchildren played in the yard, and the sounds of laughter filled the air. "Do you ever think about how things might have been different?" Grace asked. "If Reverend Webb had not found me that day." "I try not to," Zane said, tightening his arm around her. "It is too terrible to imagine. I would have remained alone, bitter and empty. You would have died on that road. Our children would never have been born. No, I do not like to think about it. Neither do I. I just feel so grateful sometimes that it overwhelms me. We have been so blessed. We have. And we have worked hard to build this life. It was not handed to us. We earned it through love and commitment and refusing to give up on each other." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Zane Xavier. I have loved you from almost the moment I met you. And I love you, Grace Xavier. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play, secure in the knowledge that the love they had found in the midst of brokenness had created a legacy that would endure for generations. As the sun set behind the Spanish peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Grace and Zane remained on the porch, hand in hand. The ranch stretched out before them, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, hope over despair. The house that had once been silent with grief was now alive with joy. The hearts that had been shattered were whole again, stronger for having been broken and healed. And the love that had seemed impossible had become the foundation of everything good in their lives. Grace thought back to the desperate woman she had been, walking alone and hopeless. She thought of the gruff cowboy who had offered her a home when she had nothing. And she marveled at how a single act of kindness from a traveling preacher had set in motion a chain of events that changed everything. It was a story she would tell her grandchildren, and they would tell their children. The story of how a homeless woman found love, a grieving man found healing, and together they built something that would last forever. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, Zane stood and offered Grace his hand. "Come to bed, my love. Tomorrow is another day, and I want to face it with you beside me." Grace took his hand and rose, following him into the house that had become their sanctuary. Behind them, the porch light glowed warm and welcoming, a beacon of the love that had transformed two broken people into a family that would stand the test of time. And in the quiet of the night, with Zane's arms around her and the sounds of their family sleeping peacefully nearby, Grace closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of thanksgiving for the traveling preacher who had brought her here, for the cowboy who had offered her a home in his heart, and for the love that had saved them both. Their story was one of redemption and second chances, of love rising from the ashes of loss. It was a story that proved even in the harsh reality of the frontier, even after the worst tragedies, hope could survive, love could heal, and two broken people could find their way to wholeness together. The Flying X Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations, each one telling the story of Zane and Grace. The story of a love that began with an act of compassion and grew into something that changed lives and created a legacy that would never be forgotten. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, Reverend Marcus Webb smiled, knowing that his simple choice to help a woman in need had created ripples that extended far beyond anything he could have imagined. He had been right that day when he found Grace. God had placed her in his path for a reason, and that reason had become a love story for the ages.